YouTube. I will talk about giants today from the past, from our antiquity. This is a subject that I'm very much interested in, and I've collected some interesting information here. And the existence of a race of giants on Earth is mentioned in many ancient historical sources. But scientists refute this data, stating that all these are just legends. Okay? However, in the archives of the National Museum of Natural History of France, according to Russian media reports, there's a photograph of gigantic women photographed in South Africa as recently as 1897. Well, this photograph is kept in that museum of natural history of France, archives of the Anthropological Society of Paris. This photo was placed in the so-called anomalous section and signed as follows: giant women on the road to Raarsu. Apparently this is South Africa. The photo was taken by Dr. Hugetz in 1897. The picture shows at least 3 women of enormous height, one on the left and 2 in the center. From the description you can find out that the woman on the left in the center is 22 years old and 2 meters and 30 centimeters tall. The height of the woman on the right is not specified, but her height is more than 3 meters if you compare her with the one standing next to her. But who was the photographer? So I did some research to the extent possible, and I found out this. Dr. Pierre-François Jules-Émile Huet was born in Blanc, Indre, on February 12, 1828, chief physician in 1887. He was appointed officer of the Legion of Honor in 1900. Professor of American Museum of Natural History, Franz Weidenreich, one of the main proponents of the hypothesis of the existence of giants in ancient times, believes that in those distant times, 500,000 or more years BC, giants lived in Africa. Other anthropologists still think that the first humans were dwarfs. They refer to the evolution of small mammals, for example, the suborder Equine, which gradually became larger. Weidenreich examined various skulls and jaws, including the bones of the massive Paranthropus robustus found by Broom in South Africa. He was greatly impressed by the huge teeth found in China. He could not make a table to determine the growth by the size of the teeth, but argued that large teeth and powerful jaws should correspond to a large body. Weidenreich determined that human ancestors were twice the size of a male gorilla, and this animal often reaches 6 feet in height and weighs more than 400 pounds. Double those numbers and you get the real giant. I believe that the further back in the centuries, the bigger people were. Weidenreich confidently declared, the direct ancestors of man were probably giants. Well, what kind of confirmation can be found in Africa for his interesting hypothesis? Another supporter of the theory of giants, Professor Denis Sora, believes that huge Egyptian statues can be one of its proofs. He also refers to huge stone tools recently found in Morocco. Only 12-foot giants could wield such weapons. Sora very wittily explains the existence of giants in ancient times. He believes that the attraction of the moon, which used to be much closer to the earth than it is now, reduced the weight of all living beings and contributed to their pulling upwards. Huge images in Karnak and other places indicate that in ancient times people believed in giants, although statues cannot be considered proof of their existence. Many legends about giants appeared apparently when a person met people taller than himself. From generation to generation, these stories were embellished until a 6-foot man turned into a 12-foot man. Another source of legends about giants were skeletons and teeth found in various, and yet there are giants in Africa whose tribes of giants in which men far exceed the average height. Along the banks of the Nile, I saw slender naked black fishermen of the Dinka tribe throwing spears into the muddy water. Some of them were as tall as 8 feet. The long legs allowed them to walk 74 miles in a day. There also lived the Shiluks with their reed boats, and the Nuer, who, according to tribal custom, have scars all over their forehead. The Watusi people are the tallest in Africa and even in the world. The average height of the men of this tribe is 6 feet and 6 inches, and it is not uncommon to find a man up to 9 feet tall there. Watusi inhabit the province of Rwanda in the Congo, and their legends say, and ethnographers have no reason to doubt them, that they once lived in Egypt. When the Watusi left this country, they took with them the wonderful long-haired cattle Inyambo. The span of the horns of this cattle reaches 8, 9, and even 10 feet. Truly the cattle of the giant people. This is the same cattle that can be seen in the amazing drawings on the walls of the tombs in the Valley of Kings in Luxor. Nowhere else in the world are there such wonderful lyre-shaped horns. Another proof in favor of the Egyptian origin of the Watusi is the fact that they are huge. Watusi settled in Rwanda about 400 years ago and subjugated many stunted tribes, so to say, including pygmies. The profile of the some Watusi leaders strongly resembles the faces of ancient Egyptian kings. Where do giants and dwarfs come from? Doctors point to nutrition. However, none of them can explain why Watusi, these proud African aristocrats, have reached such an unusual height. Obviously, they have kept their blood pure from generation to generation. But the appearance of these giants is an unsolvable mystery. Among the Somalis living between the Juba River and Lake Rudolph, one of the most interesting legends about giants in Africa is still preserved. This is an almost waterless area where nomadic Somalis lead the life of a camel rather than a man. However, they raise cattle and goats, and some sell ivory. In different places, there are abandoned, dried-up wells. Long before the Somalis arrived here, these wells were built by some ancient people who owned such herds of cattle, which now cannot be fed here. According to Somalis, these wells were built by giants. Only a tribe of giants, they say, could break through the rocks in such an unusual way. And the skeletons found quite confirmed that the people who pierced the wells were of huge stature. Tribe of giants, they say, could break through the rocks in such an unusual way. And the skeletons found quite confirmed that the people who pierced the wells were of huge stature. Where else can you find a femur 5 feet long? It is clear that such wells could be invented, built, and used only by a developed people who also possesses extraordinary physical strength. Hundreds of such wells can be found in the Vajer Dima area, and artificial water storage facilities made by the same disappeared or vanished people are scattered throughout the country. Because the facts of the existence of giant human ancestors do not fit into the generally accepted classical theory of evolution, undermine its fundamental foundations. Only occasionally, thanks to a coincidence, information about the discovered remains or found remains of giants was leaked to the media. At the same time, the opponents, evolutionists, try to question the very significance of such finds. They say it is very strange that researchers can only see skulls and teeth, but where are the other fragments of gigantic skeletons? Maybe everything is explained much more simply, and we're dealing with such a peculiar deformation of the proportions of hominids familiar to us. That is, the head is huge, but the body is normal size. Yes, such assumptions have been made, but finally we managed to find information about the existence of a weighty, in a literal sense of the word, argument in defense of the hypothesis about the existence of giant people on Earth. It turns out that back in the 1960s, in South Africa, miners working in northern Namibia at the deposit in the Otavi Mountains, there was a unique fossil that was found on Mount Aukos, a proximal fragment of a human thigh, part of the upper bone of the right leg with a femoral joint. Judging by its fragment, this entire femur is about 2 to 3 times the size of a modern human thigh. After its discovery, the rarity ended up in the antiquities repository of the Witwatersrand University Medical Schools in South Africa, which is located near Johannesburg. In this vault, the bone lay in complete oblivion for several decades until finally one meticulous Western journalist, popularizer of the ancient history of mankind, Michael Tellinger, learned about this most valuable find of scientists. He got through to paleoanthropologist Professor Francis Thackeray, director of the Institute of Human Evolution and former president of the Paleontological Society of South Africa, and persuaded him to show a strange bone that was gathering dust in the antiquities repository without any study. The professor was extremely surprised that the journalist knew about this bone, but he did not refuse the request. The result was a very entertaining interview. I believe you can find it on the internet, I was told. Anyway, to the journalist's question about the age of the bone fragment, the professor answers that the bone is mineralized and it was found in the sedimentary rocks, whose age is determined by various geological methods to be in like 10 million years. But the professor immediately makes a reservation that the remains of a modern physical type of a man, Homo sapiens, could not be in such ancient geological layers. Such is the paradox according to Thackeray, who stands on the evolutionary point of view. A human femur could not be in the layers of sedimentary rock dating back several million years. But here it is in front of us, this bone. The bone fragment itself really looks like a fossilized, subjected to mineralization. In scientific terms, fossilized. This is really visible on the screen. This is all the more clearly seen by the professor. However, the scientists have already found out that mineralization of the organic matter of bone does not always occur. This requires certain conditions, so that the bone is buried in the thickness of sedimentary rocks, clay, sand, etc., without oxygen access, so that this bone is covered from above with the same clay or sand even before it collapses under the influence of air, soil acids, wind, and water erosion. If such conditions are met, water with mineral salts dissolved in it begins to penetrate through micro cracks into the properly buried bone. You also need a certain pressure and temperature. If everything matches, then the bone has a chance to turn into a fossil. But this process is very slow. It can last for millions of years. On average, depending on the conditions, it takes 2 million years for the bone to become fossilized. Remains less than this age are called by paleontologists and paleoanthropologists subfossils or semi-fossils. Completely fossilized organic remains are found only in sedimentary rocks exceeding this age. Thus, the chances of surviving the remains of the oldest people are minimal, but paleontologists still occasionally find something. The case in question is just one of such unique ones. That is, it is a rare piece of luck that scientists finally got a visible, real confirmation that people of gigantic stature lived on Earth several million years ago. According to the paleoanthropologist Francis Thackeray, the height of the person whose hip is in the university vault was approximately 12 feet or 3.5 meters. What will happen next? Having such a weighty material argument, will the scientists begin to actively spin the hypothesis of the existence of giant humans, so to say? Asked Belov. Alas, the demonstration of this evidence from South Africa did not cause any noise in the scientific community. Apparently, now this sensation has been put on the brakes in the same way as in the 1960s when the bone was discovered. The main reason is the paradox mentioned by Professor Thackeray. There simply cannot be a human bone in such ancient deposits. The theory of evolution forbids it. This means that the troublemaker, the fossilized piece of the thigh of an ancient giant man, must be returned to a state of complete oblivion. The bone was again put away somewhere on a shelf in the bins of the University Medical School. The presence of such an object, which is inconvenient from the point of view of classical evolutionary science, makes one fear that a fragment of a giant thigh may suddenly disappear somewhere, and the professor will probably say that he was only joking. Although, I mean, what kind of jokes are here? Thackeray's souvenir, so to say, too clearly shows that the hypothesis about the existence of giant people on Earth in the distant past cannot be dismissed. That's what Belov asserted. By the way, I met Tellinger at one of the conferences where I was a speaker, probably about around 2018. But we did not speak about this discovery. We spoke about other things. Okay, but let's end this fascinating investigation where it started, in France. And I will continue to make more videos about other evidence of giant beings or humanoids. So let's go to France. There's so-called reference to giant of Castelnau. It refers to three bone fragments, a humerus, tibia, and femoral midshaft, discovered by Georges Vacher de Lapouge in 1890 in the sediment used to cover a Bronze Age burial mound, and dating possibly back to the Neolithic. According to de Lapouge, the fossil bones may belong to one of the largest humans known to have existed. He estimated from the bone size that the human may have been about 3.5 meters, something like 11 feet 6 inches tall. No modern peer-reviewed study has been published about the alleged giant bone fragments. The bones were discovered, as I said, by Lapouge, and his findings were published in the magazine La Nature, if I pronounce it right, volume 18, 1890, issue 888. The height of the giant was estimated to be 3.5 meters, according to Lapouge, and the bones were dated to the Neolithic period. The magazine includes a photo engraving of what was identified as the bones that I mentioned, humerus, tibia, femoral midshaft of the giant, compared to a normal-sized humerus in the center. Writing in the journal La Nature, Lapouge describes the bones in detail. I think it is unnecessary to note that these bones are undeniably human, despite their enormous size. The first is the middle part of the shaft of a femur, 14 centimeters length, almost cylindrical in shape, and the circumference of the bone is 16 centimeters. The second piece is the middle and upper part of the shaft of a tibia. The circumference is 13 centimeters at the nutrient foramen. The length of fragment is 26 centimeters. The third, very singular, was regarded by good anatomists as the lower part of a humerus. The volumes of the bones were more than double the normal pieces to which they correspond. Judging by the usual intervals of anatomical points, they also involve length almost double. The subject would have been likely the size of 3.5 meters. The bones of the giant were studied at the University of Montpellier and examined by Sabatier, professor of geology of the University of Montpellier, and Delage, professor of paleontology at the University of Montpellier, in addition to other anatomists. In 1892, the bones were studied carefully by Dr. Paul Louis André Cainer, professor of pathological anatomy at Montpellier School of Medicine, for which he admitted that they represented a very tall race, but nevertheless found them abnormal in dimensions and apparently of morbid growth. It is of some interest that in 1894, press accounts mentioned a further discovery of bones of human giants unearthed at the prehistoric cemetery of Montpellier, France, 5 kilometers southwest of Castelnau. While workers were excavating a waterworks reservoir, skulls 28, 31, and 32 inches in circumference were reported alongside other bones of gigantic proportions, which indicated that they belonged to a race of men between 10 and 15 feet in height. The bones were reportedly sent to the French Academy of Sciences for further study, but I have not heard anything else about those bones.